Hey everyone, it's Terry with the Des Moines, Iowa User Group. This last a couple weeks ago, I'm kind of slow at getting my videos prepped and ready for you, but a couple weeks ago at our user group, we had the privilege of hosting Jennifer Lee, and it was such an honor to have her present at our user group and share information about Flow. I think you're going to like listening to some of the new features that she talks about in this session. Hey everyone, it's Terry with Terry's Tidbits. I am so glad you're here. Jennifer Lee, for those who don't know her, I kind of got a response or a reaction out of her when I said she's kind of like the Oprah Winfrey of Salesforce. To me, when I think of the females that are a part of the Salesforce ecosystem, she's the first name that really comes to my mind. I believe you have 8 certifications on the platform. She speaks everywhere. You will now see her on the big stage at almost all of the Dreamforce type events. She is a Salesforce evangelist and just an amazing teacher. So happy that you're here, Jennifer. I'm going to be quiet and let you kind of take the show from here.
What an awesome introduction. Thank you so much for having me, Terry. All right. So like with every Salesforce presentation, before I begin, I need to remind everyone that customers should base their purchasing decisions on current products and services. I will be showing features that are yet to hit your production org and may also be making some forward-looking statements. So that covers me. All right, so oops. We're having mouse issues. Okay, so I do want to take a moment to thank all the awesome admins out there for continuing to do your thing in this crazy new world, right, that we're living in. And you all continue to be so involved in the community. You help contribute, knowledge share, you lift each other up, and you are all true trailblazers. So I want to recognize you and thank you for all that you do. All right, so we're going to cover a lot of things today and all about my favorite topic, Flow. So we're going to talk about the fairly recent announcement about workflow roles and processes and walk through why Flow. Then I'm going to give a demo, and I know we all love demos, right? We're going to talk about also various flow design patterns and what you can do as an admin to help your org prepare for this move if you have workflow roles and processes right now. And then I'm going to highlight some of the cool new features that we will be seeing in our upcoming Spring 22 release. And finally, we'll wrap up with some Q&A. All right, so let's go with the flow. Okay, so first things first. By now, I think everyone has heard the news about the upcoming retirement of workflow roles and processes. Whether it was at the Winter 22 admin preview during my awesome admin build and automate apps fast Dreamforce episode, or true to the core at Dreamforce. So we are moving forward towards one automation builder, and that is Flow Builder. So the exact end of life dates for workflow roles and process builder has not been announced. It's still being worked through with legal and all of that. But do know that various teams at Salesforce, including the admin relations team that I'm a part of, we also have the Trailhead team and all sorts of other folks at Trailhead are hard at work with updating and creating content to help you on that journey. So I do recommend that you read the blog post, What's Happening with Workflow Roles and Process Builder on admins.salesforce.com. It has a lot of answers to your questions. And if there are any additional questions, let me know what those are. And we can always continue to update that blog post. So that's like one single source of truth for all your questions about the change that's upcoming. So why Flow? There are just many declarative automation tools out there. So you have the workflow roles, process builder, flow builder, that many do similar things. And ultimately, it's hard for Salesforce to have to support all those different tools and continue to enhance them, right? So the idea is flow is the future of automation. And if you pay attention, you'll see flow used in various places in Salesforce and in other clouds as well as you're watching, release readiness or seeing demos on Health Cloud or Financial Services Cloud. You'll see flow Builder being used in those various clouds. Plus, flow is also faster in terms of processing than workflow rules and processes. And it also allows the admin and developer to supplement the out-of-box flow builder with low and pro-code components, which the others don't really do that. So here's what's on the horizon. So in spring 22, we will be introducing a new beta migration tool for workflow rules. So we're going to focus on workflow rules first, and then subsequently we'll have a tool for process builder migration. We also, based on the feedback that we heard at True to the Core at Dreamforce, we are now providing flow support in our standard support as of December of last year. So if you're building flows, you run into issues, submit a support case, and they're going to be able, support will be able to help you, as opposed to previously, they considered that as Flow Builder to be a dev tool, and they kind of were hands off. And as I mentioned, we will have a lot more that we're working on and we'll be delivering to you to help you on this journey. For example, the Trailhead team is already looking at all sorts of content that we have out on Trailhead and making the modification where we're making references to process builder workflow rules. You're going to see flow. They're in the process of updating the process automation super badge. So you're going to see flow in there ultimately when they introduce the newly revamped super badge instead of process builder, for example. And we're just combing through all our content where we previously pushed process builder, you'll see flow. And we're looking at producing more content from the admin side as well to help you on that journey. So really stay tuned for that. All right, so let's look into the future. So as I mentioned, we plan to focus on workflow rules first and then processes. Workflow rules because they're simpler than process builders. And the plan is to disable the ability to create net new workflow rules and processes in winter 23, which would be the last release of this year. You will still have the ability to edit your existing workflow rules and processes. Those will continue to work until we announce end of life for those products. Again, that's still TBD at this point. And the Einstein Automate team will continue to deliver more and more flow enhancements to you. And you'll see a few more today in my preview to spring 22. All right, so you have several options when creating a record triggered flow. You have the fast field update, which is also known as the before save flow. And this is the most performant of the record triggered flows. This allows you to make a change to an existing record only, the one that fired off the record triggered flow. There's also related records and actions, and that's considered an after save flow. So before save is before you're doing things to the record before it actually saves to the database. After save flow is once the record that triggered off the process fires off the flow, then you're making all these other changes. So the related records and actions gives you more options. So it allows you to update the record itself and related records. You can call things like other subflows. You can bring in actions like send emails or invoke code. So this record triggered flow is most similar to Process Builder, and it offers better error handling and failures. The next one is run asynchronously, and this is considered after commit. This was introduced in our last release, and this will run after the transaction commits and starts a new flow interview. So this is very similar to an Apex trigger and is used to call external services, interact with external objects, or if you have a situation where you have mixed DML actions, this will solve for that. So a mixed DML action is when you're making a change to the user a record in the user object and a non-setup object. So all the other objects, other standard objects, and your custom objects. If you ever tried that, you would get this like mixed DML action error, and this is a way to solve for that. And then lastly, we have scheduled paths. And this allows you to schedule things to run after the trigger fires. And this is similar to a time-based trigger in workflow rules or a scheduled action in Process Builder. Okay, so moving on to the different trigger types in Flow. So we just covered off on record triggered. There's also scheduled triggered, platform event triggered, and auto launch flows, plus screen flows that we're not seeing here because they're not really triggered off of something. It's the screen that's being shown to the end user. So record triggered launches when a record is created, updated, or deleted. And it's the replacement for workflow rules and Process Builder. Scheduled triggers launch either daily or weekly and allows you to take action on several records in a batch mode. Platform event triggered flows start the flow when a platform event is received, and then it does other things. And an auto launch flow is a flow that's launched from all sorts of things like paths, REST API, another flow, Process Builder, quick action, a button, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so now it's demo time. So I'm going to walk through two scenarios, a workflow rule, and then we're going to convert it to Flow, and then a Process Builder, and we're going to convert it to Flow. So what I have here is a screenshot of a workflow rule that runs when a record is created or updated that meets the criteria where our contact mailing city is Boston. Then it's going to create a task, send an email, and update a field. And then next, we're going to see, for the process, we're going to see an account process when a record is created or edited, and then we're going to convert that into 3 individual flows, before save and 2 after saves. All right, so that workflow rule will ultimately convert to this record triggered flow. Okay, so I don't do well by clicking and talking at the same time. I realize that that slows me down. So I recorded it so I could talk over it. So this is my demo assistant. All right, so we're essentially going to build a new record triggered flow for that workflow rule. So we're having it fire off of the contact object when the record is updated or created, and we're setting the conditions where the contact mailing city is Boston. And we're going to have it fire only when the record is updated to meet the conditions and its action and related records. So here first, I am going to create a record, and it's going to create a task. So we're going to set the variables, and we're going to create a task record. I'm going to set various fields on that task to create it. So first the subject, and it's really just taking from that workflow rule and putting it into this create records. So the subject is, this is an auto-generated task. The status is not started. The priority is normal. And we're going to set the activity date, and we're going to set it with a formula. So I'm going to go and create a new resource. and we're going to select formula. So it works this flow formulas work everywhere like formulas do in Salesforce. And I always like to give my things descriptions. So here our formula is going to take the created date and add 3 days to it. So we're going to use the records created date. And we're going to add 3. And then we're going to add the who ID. And here I'm going to also create a formula. Sorry, come back to that because I need to go and retrieve the who ID. All right. Okay, so in order to, because we don't hard code IDs, what I'm going to do is get the user's ID. So we're going to assign the who ID to Addison Dogster, but we don't have her ID right now. So we need to do a lookup on the user object to get her ID. So we're going to do a get records, and that's really just querying an object. And we're going to look up using her first name and last name. So it's going to be first name Addison, last name Dogster. And we're only going to retrieve the first record that it finds. Now, then going back to the create a task, now we're able to specify the ID. So again, we're not hard coding IDs. We're going to do a get record that finds the ID based on Addison Dogster as the name. And then we're identifying, once we find the record, I just want the ID here. All right. And we're going to send an email alert. And this is an action. So it uses the API name of the email alert that you've already configured. And this uses the same one that I configured with my for use with my workflow role. And here we're just going to reference the record ID that fired off the process. So it's going to eventually find the record ID. There it goes. So $record will give you access to all the fields on that record. Great. And then our last step is to do a update record. So we're updating a specific field on the record that triggered the process. So we're going to keep it as use the contact record that triggered the flow as the record that we're going to update. And we don't need to set any other filter criteria on that record. And now I'm just setting the mailing state to Massachusetts. So based on mailing city is Boston, I know the mailing state is Massachusetts. So then we're going to name our flow. So I named it similar to what the workflow role was named. And then you have this debug feature. So before activating your flow in production, you can do a test of it. Sorry, activating your flow in a sandbox. So you can do a test of it. And here you're able to see the debug features So there was a problem with my flow where I had a field integrity exception. So I'm going to go back into my tasks. And I figured out that the who ID was set. But what I really meant to do was set the owner ID. So I made that change, hit save, and then you could debug again. So I'm setting it to run on updated with the Jane Gray contact, and I'm setting it to the mailing city Boston, hitting run because that's what fires off my record triggered flow. And now you can see the yellow, it means it went through successfully and completed the flow. So each little box that you expand gives you the details of each flow step. So as you're going through and validating the information, you can see what the various pieces were set at. And this just helps in terms of troubleshooting. All right, so that is our first one. So our next use case is we have a process builder that has 3 criteria nodes, one looking at accounts in Boston, updating the state, one looking at accounts in California, sending an email, another looks to see if the account status has changed to inactive. Then we're going to find all the open cases and update a field on those open cases. And then a day from now, we're going to go and update the description. So ultimately, what I ended up doing was broke it down into 3 separate flows, and we'll talk about why I did that in a little bit. So, I'll share this with Terry after the fact so that you can also have access to the video file, the deck, as well as this has a link to if you're new to loops, it's a beginner's guide of what loops are. All right, so now let's take a look at these flows. So again, we're only focusing on record triggered flows, and this is off of the account object when the record is created or updated. And we're going to set our conditions. And here I'm looking at billing state. Oops. Billing city equals Boston. Sorry. And we're looking at fast field updates. Again, it's on the record that triggered off the process. So this is. So we're going to select update that record. And we're going to keep it on the account record that triggered off on the flow. And here's where we're setting billing state equals Massachusetts. So give it a name, update new or updated accounts in Boston. And that's our first flow. We're just going to quickly debug it. Here again, we're changing the billing city to Boston. And then we see that it runs successfully with the completed green at the top. And we saw that it updated the state to the billing state to Massachusetts. So our next flow is also a record triggered flow, and this will be an after save. So again, we're running off of the account object when a record is updated or created. And here we're looking at the accounts that are in California. So billing state equals California. And we're going to select only when the record is updated to meet the conditions. And this is actions and related records. And here we're going to send an email alert. And these are email alerts that are already created as part of our process builder. So all we need to do here is identify the record ID. So the $ record, and then just specifying that account ID. So then we're going to save it, give it a name. Right. And then debug, just to make sure it's working as expected. So there I selected a test account that was already set to California. So we're able to verify that the email was able to be sent. And then our last record triggered flow, again, will be an after save. We're still working with the account object. And again, it's when a record is created or updated. And here we're going to focus on a custom field called status. It's set to inactive. And we're setting it to only when a record is updated to meet the condition requirements and not every single time we see a record that status equals inactive. And we're going to keep it as actions and related records. So it defaults to auto layout. This is on a Spring 22 org. I like working with my flows free form, so I like laying it out. So we're going to do that for this one. So here in this process, when an account is set to inactive, what we're going to do is take all the open cases that are associated with that account. So we're going to do a get records in order to get those cases. So here we're looking at the case object. And our conditions is we're looking at the account ID equals that record ID that fired off the process. So we're looking at the $ record and identifying the account ID. Now we're also looking at the status field. And what we don't want is pull back any cases that are in closed status. So account ID equals the one that fired off the process and the status is closed. So we're going to grab all the records that meet that criteria. And this is where we're introducing a loop, because once we get all those open cases, they're in a collection. And now just think of a loop as going through an assembly line where every single case that you find has to go through that. So think of that Lucy episode, I Love Lucy episode, where she's the assembly line with the chocolates. And if you haven't watched that, you need to, because that's hilarious. So we have a loop and we're saying for each open case that you find, we're going to set status, doing assignment. And this just takes a value and then sets it to something else. So we're going to look at the case in the loop and specifically the status field, and we're going to set it to close. So this hasn't saved anything to the record yet. It's just seeing it changing the status field in flow. Next, we're going to do another assignment. And here, what we're going to do is add this loop record, this single case, into a collection. And after our loop, we're going to make the update, because bad practice is within a loop making any type of updates, because you're going to hit, you could potentially hit governor limits. So that's the same thing in code as well. So right here, we're just identifying a new variable. A variable is just, think of it as a Tupperware container that holds something that you'll do at some other point in the flow. And what we're doing with this Tupperware container is we're holding all the cases that we got from that get record. So all the open cases. And we set it to hold multiple, so it's a collection. So what we're going to do, and this reads backwards. So we're going to look at the case in the loop and assign it to that collection. So I don't know why it reads collection add loop. And then lastly, once it does that, we're going to go back to the loop and pick up the second open case, and we're going to go through that process for every single case, that open case that we were able to find. And once that's done, then we wrap it up with a update records flow element, which then takes all those cases in that collection and then does that update, where at this point it will say, take all those open cases and change the status to closed. So this will actually update in Salesforce, those records. Whereas the assignments were just changing the value, but it was just happening within flow. So next we're configuring the scheduled path. So this is similar to a scheduled action in a process builder. And we're have it run off of the account's last modified date, and we're going to set it to run a day after it. And then what we're going to do is update the description field. So we have update records. Again, we're setting it to use the record, the account record that triggered the flow. And we're set the description. And here I'm going to use a formula instead of just typing in the text, because we're pulling in a date reference. So think of it as merge fields in Salesforce. So the account was set to inactive on a specific date. And then I'm going to draw the connector so that that only runs off of the scheduled paths. So one day after the last modified date. And we're going to save it and debug it. Okay. All right, we're going to pick account and run it. And here the account I knew was already inactive. And we're just going through and making sure that it was able to find cases. It found 2. And then it goes through the loop of, this was the first record that I found. I set it to close. I added it to the case collection. And then once I was done, I'm going to the second of the 2 open cases that I found, going through that same process again. And here I was at the end of the loop because I only had 2 case records. And then I updated the 2 cases to closed. Now I'm going to test the scheduled path piece with that same record. And we found that that executed properly with the update field, setting that description to the account was set to update on the date that I saved this recording. And here I just picked a record that didn't have its status changed to inactive to see that that process would not run at all. So it was just doing negative testing just to make sure that it was working as expected if it didn't meet that criteria. Okay, so let's talk about design patterns. Should we create one record triggered flow per object? I've seen this question asked a lot in the community. I know that with Apex triggers, our recommendation is one Apex trigger per object. That was our recommendation for Process Builder as well. Our answer to flow is it depends. I know people don't really like that answer. It depends. So you want to design your flow based on how you need to run your business. So we're not going to say it should be this way, right? I've worked in large orgs where I've had an org that had multiple business units, and what we did was we built business unit specific record triggered flows so that they could ultimately control their own destiny, right? So it wasn't this massive one big flow that had all the business units. And if someone made a change, everyone had to regression test and you could have potentially broken someone else's, right? So in that case, it made sense for this business unit to have a record trigger flow that was just theirs and looked at and fired off of a specific object and a specific record type, and then whatever other criteria so that they can control how they want their flows to work. Now, some people in the community have also created one before save flow for object, one after save flow, and one delete record trigger flow per object with subflows in that after save flow. What I'm saying here is, so that helps control the order of execution, because if you don't, and you have all these individual flows, Salesforce just picks the flows at random. Like it'll fire all the before save flows in whatever order it decides, and then all the after save flows in whatever order it decides. But that's not necessary anymore to have the one per object, before save, after save, delete. And it's just teasing on a new feature that's coming up in spring 22. So just wait with me for a little bit and we'll cover off on that. So I talked about here's an example where I have an account record triggered flow. It's an after save and I have decision. So this looks very similar to a process builder where you have decisions and then this thing happens. I could have created this as a subflow, but I just kept it simple. So it looks similar to what you would see in a process builder if you had those all together like that. What I ended up doing in the demo was creating these 3 individual flows. So there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's just, how you want to run your business. So this way is not much better than this way. It's just, how do you want to organize it for you? Okay. Oops. Didn't mean to do that. All right. So next steps for you to take as an admin in your org. So as you're coming up with new requirements for automation, I highly recommend that you try and create those with the record triggered flow instead of a workflow rule process. I know it's tempting to do what you're used to doing, but I highly recommend that you try and put it in a record triggered flow and see if that works, right? If it works, great, right? Second, start creating that backlog to address your existing workflow rules and processes. Don't wait until end of life is announced and then you're scrambling to do all those things while still, supporting your business and making whatever changes you need for that piece. Do it little bits and pieces at a time, so it's not overwhelming, right? I also recommend that you don't just do a lift and shift, like take those existing ones and just move it over as is. Take the time, because you have backlog and you've provided enough time before we make that end of life announcement, is take the time to do the analysis. Sit down with the business and say, are these still valid? Like so before I even came to Salesforce, I had time towards the end of a year, and I was like, okay, well, I had an org that had workflow rules and processes. And every time I looked at them, I just like absolutely hated it because they're old technology. So I took it upon myself. I'm like, okay, well, I have spare time. So I'm going to start working by object and take my workflow rules and move it to a record triggered flow. And as I was doing that, a lot of questions came up like, okay, well, is this really needed? So I sat down with the business and I asked questions about the existing workflow rules and processes and these were built 5 years ago, right? Some of the people weren't even sure why these workflow rules were in place. So I ended up being able to do Marie Kondo and getting rid of several workflow rules and processes. I'm like, yeah, we don't need those. I'm getting rid of them. Also gives you the opportunity to revisit and, consolidate, improve, right? Just because you built things 5 years ago, they might not be needed. There were improvements along the way, right? So take the time to make things better, right? Don't just do a lift and shift. We do have those migration tools that we will be providing that will allow you to do it. But I think it's really worth the time to spend on doing your upfront analysis and getting rid of the stuff that you really don't need to do. And you might be in the situation where you end up redesigning how your automation works, but do a lot of testing of your flow. Make sure that when you're testing your flow, you deactivate your old workflows and processes so those don't run at the same time that your new flow is running, right? And I can't stress enough that you want to test in a sandbox. You might have Apex triggers also running. So ultimately, you want to make sure that what you built in a record trigger flow works exactly how you expect it to work. And you need to consider things like order of execution. So anything in your before save runs before Apex save. So you want to just make sure whatever you're doing with that record flows in the order that it was previously working in, or you set the expectations, well, now it works slightly differently because I've set it up this way. Okay, great. That's that. And we're gonna move on to spring 22. So that release is just right around the corner next month. So we're now going to take a look at what is hitting your production org fairly soon. Okay, so when you go to your workflow rule and process builder setup pages, you will now be reminded of the upcoming retirement of these two new tools. And if you click on the Tell Me More, that will take you to that admin blog post that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. And then with workflow rules, you'll also have a link to migrate your workflow rules to Flow, and that will take you to the builder that's coming in spring 22 that I will show you in a little bit. And then if you decide, hey, I'm going to still go and build that new workflow rule and process builder, well, guess what? We're going to remind you again. Hey, why don't you try Flow Builder instead? So you can click here, click the Create and Flow Builder to automatically move into the Flow Builder tool, or if you really, really want to, continue to build your workflow rule and process builder. But by doing so, you're only incurring tech debt for your org, because at some point you're going to need to move it to Flow Builder. So why not just start in Flow Builder, right? If you're able to. Okay, so this is the new workflow rule migration tool. It's in beta. And what that means is we weren't able to get all the bells and whistles that we wanted to for a workflow rule migration tool that's generally available that had everything. We just ran out of time in order to hit this release to get something out the door for you. So this just takes a workflow rule and migrates it to a record triggered flow. And if you use the tool, I recommend that you rename the names that are automatically generated, because update main and scheduled path up one update aren't very user friendly. So name it what it makes sense for you. Okay, so here's the migration tool. I'm on workflow rules. I get into a workflow rule here, and this one does an email update, a field update, and a record triggered update. So you can get to the migration tool by that link or by going to migrate to flow. And when you select a workflow rule, you can migrate to flow with the drop down or the button. And then it takes a few minutes to create that into Flow. So you can test it in Flow Builder and then lastly, update it after you test it. So we're looking at what this automatically created as part of the migration tool. So again, the names of the flow elements aren't really user-friendly, so update them accordingly. But this took, the mailing city equals Boston, and it has the scheduled paths 30 days after the record is created or updated. So it took what you had in your workflow rule and moved it into Flow for you. So just a couple of button clicks and it did the work for you. All right. Now, I mentioned it's in beta, so a couple of caveats with that. So this tool in Spring 22 will allow you to migrate your workflow rules as is if they have a field-based criteria, field updates, email alerts, outbound messages, time-dependent workflow actions. It will not migrate if you have a rule criteria that's formula-based, if you're using global variables and record types, if you're creating tasks, or you have field updates to record owners. And also the tool does not allow you to select multiple workflow rules to consolidate into a flow. So know that the team is working on all of these that currently the tool does not migrate, with the exception of multiple workflow rules in a consolidated flow. If that is something that you want our team to work on and deliver, I recommend that you put this out on the idea exchange and have people vote on it. It's currently not on the roadmap, but as customers of Salesforce, you can help drive our roadmap by telling us how important that piece of functionality is to you, okay? All right, so our next new tool is Flow Explorer, Flow Trigger Explorer. So what this does is, unlike the list view on your Flow setup page, you can now visualize for an object when a record is created, updated, or deleted for all record triggered flows and orchestrations, broken out by fast field updates, actions and record updates, and runs asynchronously. So just to note, right now, all record triggered flows and orchestrations are listed in this Flow Trigger Explorer by flow name alphabetically in each category. It is on the roadmap, to be adjusted so that it's not running off alphabetically based on the next feature that I'm going to highlight. But let me just show you the flow trigger first. So you get to it from the flow setup screen. You're able to look up any object in your org, custom or standard. I'm looking up a custom object that I have cupcake order, and you're able to drill into and see the flow details and versions from this one screen. So if you have a flow that has multiple, as in this one, you're able to see all the versions. You're able to see which ones I have active, which ones are in draft. You can open them directly. And from this one screen, you can activate and deactivate your flows. So multiple ways to open flows directly from this Flow Trigger Explorer. When you're in a record triggered flow, you can also get back to that Flow Trigger Explorer from there as well. Great. Okay, so this new enhancement is called Trigger Order. And this is something that admins will be really excited about, because now you can specify the order of execution for your record triggered flow in relation to those other record triggered flows on your object. So no more letting Salesforce run at random or needing to create that one triggered record triggered flow per object with subflows. You can now control your destiny, right? So you can go into the settings of a flow and then set a value in this trigger order field. So go into advanced properties to get to this field. All right, so you basically put a number from 1 to 2000 into this field. And the way that the algorithm runs is flows with 1 to 1000 will run first. Then all the flows that have a blank trigger order, so similar to how it does today, but you weren't aware of that behind the scenes. And then any flows that are numbered 1001 to 2000 will run after that. So a couple of things to note is that there's not going to be a mix and match between before saves running in between after saves. It's all the before saves first in that order, right? 1 to 2000, and then all the after saves. So it's not, you can't mix and match the numbers. Flows that don't have a number will continue to run as they do right now. And flows that have the same numbering. So if you named ordered to 100, then they will run alphabetically by the flow's API name. And that's how you'll determine who wins in that case. So we recommend that you number your automation with spacing between. So you're not numbering them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because if you get a new flow, then guess what? You're renumbering them. And that's a pain in the ass. So we recommend spacing them out like 10s, 20s, 30, 40s, right? Or by hundreds. So you're leaving enough room so that you can then add in things as needed without having to redo all the numbering, because no one has time for that. Okay. All right. So if you're using auto layout, we provided 2 shortcuts to commonly use actions, and that is update triggering records and send email updates, so that you don't have to scroll to get them. They're the most commonly used functions, so we put them up front for you and gave you a shortcut. We also introduced a new flow element called collection filter, and this gives you a new way to find and filter records in a collection. So you can now specify a record criteria or create a formula that then further filters records in an existing record collection without having to do complex looping through the records in that collection. So think back to the scenario where I did, I retrieved the open cases for that account. If you wanted to in somewhere else in your flow, you wanted the open cases for that account that were created on this date forward, you can then further use that collection filter to further filter that out versus having to do another get records or do some complex looping through that. So it's just an easier way to do filtering. All right, and another feature is if you're like me, and when I work in Salesforce, I have like a gazillion tabs open and I have several flow tabs open. Now you're gonna like this feature because now you could just hover over and you can see the name of your flow versus having to click in and see, hey, what's this tab? Which tab is this? Which of my many dozen of flows that I have open? So now you can see that in the browser tab itself. Also in this release, auto layout is no longer in beta. It has gone GA. So when you're creating a new flow, it will default to auto layout. You still have the ability to go back to free form as you wish. Another feature is when you're in the auto layout mode only, doesn't apply to free form, you can now have quick access to your subflows. So you can open them directly from whatever flow that's invoking it versus having to go back to your setup page, find that subflow to open it up individually. So it really boosts up productivity. We also, for auto launch flows for loops, we've improved our path routing. So now you could connect the path within a loop to the head element in that loop, or you could end a path within a loop. And you can convert flows with loops from free form to auto layout, which before you couldn't do that. All right. And if you work on screen flows in the previous release, being able to customize the labels of the buttons was beta. It's now generally available. So you could rename the previous pause, next, and finish buttons in the footer and not need a custom component from unofficial SF. You could just name them whatever you want yourself, because I hardly ever have go with back and finish and next. Oh, and also in Spring 22, you can now provide translations for those footer labels too. And the dynamic forms for flow feature allows admins to build screen flows faster by quickly adding a Salesforce object field to your flow screens. So once you add that object field, it inherits the field name, data type, help text, requiredness, and existing field values automatically configured for you. So that's been, continues to be in beta. In Spring 22, you can now add a pick list, email, and phone number fields, in addition to the existing list of data types. So we already have checkbox, text, date, date time, number, text area, and text area long. All right, so these are, so there are more flow features. I've only highlighted a few. So I've only scratched the surface, but I recommend that you watch Admin Preview Live on February 4th and the Einstein Automate Release Readiness Live on February 9th for more. And that will also give you the ability to ask the Flow product manager, Diana Jaffe, questions live. And with that, I will take questions.
That was fantastic. Thank you. So if you have questions for Jen, you are welcome to put those in the chat or unmute and ask away. I've got 100 of them that I wrote down, so I'll let you guys get in there ahead of me. We'll watch the chat as well, so if you're a little bit camera shy, we will take care of you that way as well. So ask away. It's a great opportunity to.
I have a quick question. I know you mentioned that it's based on your org. how you organize, how many flows you create by object, etc. We have our little workflows. They're so tiny, minute, bite size. So I'm assuming we're going to repeat those bite size or try to organize them in one flow. I guess my question is, should we do it that way or create one big flow, I guess? Because we have so many small bite size pieces.
Have your team worked on flows yet or created or familiar with creating, like how experienced are you with creating record trigger flows?
I'm probably a beginner, but I do have a senior admin that's been doing larger ones. And
so based on the trigger order, there's no reason why you would need to go complex with the subflows. That I would think is a little bit more complex for a beginner to grasp, being able to create those subflows and then invoke it. I would say for now, as your learning flow, start with the bite size. And if you find that in the long run, as you're getting more comfortable with flow and it makes sense to go that other route, then go that other route. But I think because we have that trigger order functionality, you don't necessarily need to go the complex, massive flow and have subflows.
And the second question is, are we able to organize and see everything, like everything associated to like one object or whatnot? Like an easier way to filter through the flows, etc.
So like you would be able to use that flow trigger explorer that just came out. But the one caveat there is you won't be able to see the trigger order. On the roadmap, I know they're working on being able to show the flow trigger explorer in the trigger order by trigger order. And they're also looking into a drag and drop capability where you can take a flow within that list and just move it and drop it, and then it will reorder for you. So right now you can't visually see what order.
Very good. It's good that you're having on the roadmap though. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Jen, we've got a question in the chat from Chris. What are your thoughts on writing Apex unit test for flows? Good, bad, ugly?
If you have the skills, I think it's good to have Apex tests, just because you'll be able to run and see how things work and if they test or there's conflicts. Do know that on the roadmap, the automation team is also working on flow testing and being able to create those as well. So it's on the roadmap, but if you want to take a quicker stab at that, I would think that it's a good thing to have unit tests for sure. So at least you know before you put it into production that you could potentially have a conflict. And one thing that I did as a best practice, even when I put in I was deploying things like processes and flows, is I would run all Apex tests before I do deployment, because you'll know if it conflicts with a trigger that's already there. What you don't want to do is put it out there and it fails. When you do your deployment, and if you run all your test classes and finding out as you're doing a deployment that failed versus upfront. So I hope that answers your question.
Can you clarify for us the February 4th and the February 9th events?
Yep. So admin preview. So the developer and admin do their preview on the first day of release readiness. So that's on the 4th. And then Einstein Automate is on the 9th.
Okay. And I think Sula put a link for that also in the chat there. So thank you.
And you'll see me on both.
Oh, very good. Other questions? You're going to make me go through my list of 100 of them? Is that the plan?
That's very good, yeah. Jennifer Griffin here. Is there any penalty, let's say, by when you're getting a related record by saving, all of the fields or just the fields maybe you want to update. Does that make sense?
Yes. So I'm not sure if there is any type of penalty. Ever
I'm
since
thinking-
they've included that new feature, I've been just saying save all fields versus having to individually specify all the fields that you need, because sometimes you don't know, like as I'm building, I'm like, oh, I need that new field. So then you have to go back and then configure it versus you already have all the fields at your fingertips.
And by penalty, I was thinking speed wise, if it would take longer.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. And I forgot my other question. Go ahead, Gary.
On the workflow role where you were sending an email, you use the old workflow role email action. Are those still staying? Is it just the workflow role itself that's going away, but the actions that we would call?
Yeah, so the email template and the email alert would continue to stay.
It does stay. Okay. Good to know, because that's a lot easier to build than doing it from scratch inside of Flow.
Right.
Good. Other questions?
I have one.
Mhm.
Hi, this is Donna. Let's say we get everything converted over to a flow, and you talked about getting rid of these processes and rules. What do you mean? Does that mean delete them once they've been converted, or what do you do with the old processes?
So I would recommend when you're ready to go live into production with your flow that you deactivate that workflow role and process. Keep it deactivated for a little bit, just because if you run into a problem, you can easily activate that workflow role and process and deactivate that flow while you troubleshoot and figure out what the problem is. And then after you have it running in production for a while without any instances, that's when I'll go ahead and delete that workflow role and process.
Okay, good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next. So my next question then is, on your before record trigger flow, you chose to update the dollar record using the update element instead of an assignment. Is there an advantage one way or the other?
I think previously they didn't have the update assignment in the before save. And I think they recently added it. And I think it might have been like the last release just to make it consistent. So I don't think that there's really a difference. I think it was just consistency when teaching someone flow. Instead of having assignment in a before save, they also have the update record as well.
Okay, good. My next one's kind of a more technical question that has to do with the bulkification. I've read through some of the architecture articles around the bulkification and trying to understand some of how that works. Are they going to put together some type of a diagram or some type of a tool that better explains how that bulkification works within flows? Have you seen anything along that?
I have not, but I think it would be a good thing to ask Diana Jaffe for, whether it's asking the question on Release Live, or I know she's active on Twitter as well as the Trailblazer community.
Okay.
If you have feedback on anything that I presented, the Trailblazer community that the team actually goes into and responds to or monitors is the Salesforce automation Trailblazer community.
Okay. Cool. A lot of questions.
So I see one in the chat from Brittany. I don't understand why an ID was used in the email alert. Could we review that step and other options to send email alerts and flow? like with the template and images. So the easiest way was to use that send email out of the box flow action. Let me see if I can show. Hold on. So let me just close out on a couple things. All right, so I think I'm sharing my Chrome.
Yeah, we see flow.
Okay. All right, so let me go into one. Forget which one had the send email.
Thank you so much, Jen.
Oh, no worries. And of course, I picked the one that doesn't. I believe this one does.
Oh, I like that.
Oh, dog.
Whose animal was that? That is fantastic.
My dog is surprisingly very quiet.
And mine is normally laying down beside me.
I usually like lock her out of the room that I'm doing the presentation in because you never know what sets her off. But she's pretty quiet. So this is using the send email functionality. So all it did here when I configured it, let me just go back here and just create a new one. So anything that has send email, it will pull up an email alert that you already configured in your org. So by selecting it, it knows all the things about your email alert, and it just wants to be able to associate that email alert with whatever the record is. So that's why you have to specify the ID. There's also other send email capabilities.
Sorry, Jen, and the record ID that we specified, that's the record ID of the email alert, or which ID is that?
It's of the record that you're associating that email alert to. So if it's the account ID or the contact, whatever fired off on your, that you're associating that email alert to.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay. And then these are the email alerts that we configured like in the workflow type user interface. Yeah.
Yeah. Or any email alert that you have in your org, you can pull that in. There is also, let me try and find it. There's also an action called send email, where you could then, if you didn't want to go the email alert route with an email template that you've already configured, you can free form create it here by typing in whatever you want in the body of the email, the subject, and then you could specify the email addresses in a comma separation or collection. You can also specify rich text formatted body where you can then pull in a text template flow element that allows you to do bolding and underlining and things like that. Otherwise, it's just going to be a straight HTML that you show here. You can also specify the sender address and type as well. Whereas in an email template, it's already formatted and all that.
Okay, and we can use Lightning email templates now, correct?
I don't recall if you could use those in Flow yet, or if they are only doing Classic. That I'll have to check offline. I don't know off the top of my head. I know, Terry, if you know.
Yeah, I've not seen that either.
I see. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Other questions?
Are workflow rules created in an org by managed packages going to be updated to flow automatically?
Yeah.
I am thinking not. I think that you would need to go back to whoever had those managed packages to update them. I don't think that we would go through and automatically convert things for you.
I have a question, Jen, about something I saw in the release notes the other day.
Mhm.
So there was a piece about 2-column flow layouts being superseded by multi-column screens. So these things called section components that are going to replace 2-column, any layout where you've specified a 2-column or screen where you've specified a 2-column layout. And in the notes, it said something about how starting in winter 23, 2-column layouts are going to be ignored. I didn't know what that meant. And then the notes start to say that we need to start like planning for it now. So I don't know if you're aware of what will happen in winter 23 if we haven't gone through and converted those to sections, but that was my question.
I do not know off the top of my head what will happen, but what I could do is reach out to the PMs and ask them what the expected behavior would be, and I could come back with the answer to Terry, and he could communicate that out.
That would be nice. Thank you.
Perfect.
You're welcome.
Clarissa, you're like a flow expert. You have no questions here for Jen.
No.
Clarissa is one of the ones that has helped in some of the training, flow training stuff that I've done. She's fantastic. Does a great job.
Oh, thanks. That is high praise, Terry.
Yeah. Any other questions? Great opportunity to chat here with Jen. If not, Jen, thank you again so much. I so much appreciate you being here. You're welcome anytime to drop in on us. We would love to have you.
I got a quick question.
Yes.
Yes. That's
Terry
on the
dropped.
code.
Yep. Terry dropped a hint earlier that there was a story behind you getting your golden hoodie.
Oh yeah, the golden hoodie. Yeah.
Oh, during one of the
Oh, it's handy.
I went in and I pulled it out from my closet. So before the golden hoodie, I was given the Awesome Admin Award in 2017 at the Boston World Tour, and it was for like my community work and things on flow. And it wasn't until after Zach Atura received the golden hoodie, he was the first golden hoodie recipient, that they felt they should retroactively give everybody else who's received the Awesome Admin Award a golden hoodie. So it was at a future, I don't remember which Dreamforce, but they told us all to gather around after the main keynote, and they handed out all the golden hoodies to us. So there's like this big picture with all of us with our golden hoodies.
And do you wear that around or just at Dreamforce?
So so when I went to community conferences or world tours, Dreamforce, TDX, I would wear my golden hoodie around. But normally I don't really like it so blingy. So I wear it with the black and then the hint of gold.
Oh, sure.
But it's pretty warm with the gold reflection. So it gets pretty hot if you wear it too long. And I've had people come up and ask me if they could touch it, which is kind of weird. Like, can I touch? I don't want to talk to you. Can I touch your jacket? I'm like, okay. It's really weird.
Funny.
Is it easy to wash?
Yes, I've put it in the washer. I've taken it out and hand dried it because I just wasn't sure. I didn't want it to fall apart.
Fun. All right, any last questions? If not, I've got a Terry's tidbit I will share with you guys. So one more time going once,